Welcome to another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I am the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Today, my guest is Sig Muller. He is the founder of Be the World's Best, and he offers keynote speaking, executive coaching, and team workshops to help people find their focus, remove barriers, and spark their greatness. I'm really curious to learn more about how his engineering background shaped his career path, what made him decide to found Be the World's Best, and everything in between. Welcome to Teach the Geek interview, Sig.
Thanks, Neil. Fantastic to be with you and your audience today.
Great. So, first question: I noted that you studied engineering and it was industrial engineering. So, what was the motivation to study that?
Yeah, I did. So if we can rewind time to the early 80s, in the 70s, we had the Bionic Man, Steve Austin, for people that might know that TV show. So I thought I was going to be a biomedical engineer. And at the time, there were, I suppose, about a dozen programs in the whole US. One of them was at Northwestern. So I started as a biomedical engineer. And at the time, the career path there was to get a PhD or become a doctor. And I knew I didn't want to do either of those. So after 1 year, I switched to industrial engineering and management sciences. And for me, that was fantastic because it really, I at the time, I viewed it as a general engineering degree. You learned a lot about a lot of disciplines, and that launched me eventually to become a consultant with what's now Accenture. So I started my career the first 5 years programming, in COBOL, CICS, RPG, things like that. So prepared me very well for the first portion of my career.
I know that you also got an MBA. So, what was the motivation to get that degree?
Yeah, so I saw the path at Accenture to either stay there for 10 plus years and be a partner or leverage 5 awesome years of experience to sort of go to the next chapter. For me, it was really about two things. It was about broadening my business skills. I thought, well, what have I not done that I might really enjoy? And for me, that was marketing. So I wanted to go to business school to transition my career into marketing. And I also wanted to get back to Minnesota, which is where I'm from. At the time I'd been living in Chicago and working around the world. So my MBA was an inflection point for both a new career and a new industry, as well as moving back to where I grew up.
Nice. All right. So you worked at Accenture for a number of years. I mean, the type of work that you did there, was it the same type of work or did you move around within the organization?
I moved around with the organization. I worked primarily in healthcare consulting and a little bit in oil and gas consulting. But it was all designing systems, implementing computer systems, and the strategy behind it, but then, all the way through to implementation and coding. One of my more interesting assignments, I spent the bulk of my time in healthcare, but a little bit in retail, a little bit in oil and gas. I lived a year, about 11 months in North Sumatra, Indonesia, at the largest liquefied natural gas plant in the world at the time, in the middle of the jungle. And I was brought over to help with a project. It was the first international installation of Lawson, their HR and payroll system at this liquefied natural gas plant in the middle of nowhere. And we were converting it from the AS400, or excuse me, from the System 38 to the AS400 and RPG2 to RPG3. And for the first time ever, making it work internationally. And so all the technical aspects of that. So that was really a life-changing event for me to work in that kind of setting.
Wow, that's really cool. So I'm really curious. During your working life, were you ever a leader of people?
Oh yeah. And in some way, I think all of us are leaders, right? We have specific roles and they might morph depending the team you're on. But, even if you're a contributor, you're a leader in how you contribute, right? And how you show up every day and how you inspire your teammates. So at Anderson, I led teams with several hundred people that were designing and coding and implementing a system. After my MBA, I had the opportunity to lead some businesses at General Mills in the marketing. Some might be familiar to you. Things like Betty Crocker, Gold Medal Flour, some of the cereals. So, and those were large, large businesses. We all know them from the grocery store, but behind it are teams of hundreds of people and large marketing budgets. And then from there, I got into healthcare for my career and led teams in building new businesses. I've been part of six or so startups from the first several people all the way to growing them to 150, 200 people and exiting. So I have this mix of leading teams in startup mode and building, and then also Fortune 500 companies. I've worked at businesses like Mayo Clinic, United Health Group, General Mills, I already mentioned, Ben and Jerry's. But the theme throughout it all is really building businesses and leading teams to be able to successfully do that.
How did your engineering background help you in navigating all these various roles?
Yeah. Well, I'm a big believer in systems and processes and methodology. And, I think that comes from both an engineer in schooling, but then the training I had at Accenture. We had things called green sheets. We had forms called CD20s. We had method one, process one, and all of those ways of critically thinking and not just randomly throwing stuff at the wall, but actually creating a methodology and process and being deliberate in how you went about something, so critically important in anything you do. So I'm a huge believer, whether it's a startup or a large company, the methodology, the process, the discipline, which I don't think there's a better field to sort of learn that from than engineering.
I think a lot of times, say we get these backgrounds, these degrees, and we think we need to stay in those fields. But it sounds like you moved around quite a bit. I mean, you said you worked even in marketing. So for people who are watching or listening to our conversation, and perhaps they're in a more engineering technical role, and they want to move outside of that into something else, what would you suggest? How would you suggest they go about doing that?
Yeah. I do believe all of us should pursue our passions, what we really want to do, what we were put on this earth for. Um, and it's some risk, but I think it starts with a few things. I think it starts with just networking and learning. That's a pretty easy thing to do. Learn about the industry, learn about the role, meet people in the field, and just put yourself out there to be willing to do it. I think less and less it's about formal schooling. I think we all learn in a lot of different ways. So you can put yourself on a path to learn online, from reading things, from meeting people in the industry, and really explore it. And that will not only help inform uh, your decision and identify the risks and opportunities, but also put in place what you need to help make that transition happen.
When you were managing, well, before you took on any roles that required managing of people, what's one thing that you didn't anticipate about it that you found out was a big part of managing others?
Yeah, I think it was the adaptability of it. And, I was blessed to have a career early on that I was surrounded by really outstanding people. I was a Division I All-American swimmer in college. I was around some of the best swimmers in the world all of the time. At Northwestern, at Dartmouth, I was around some of the best people that everyone showed up. Everyone wanted to excel. Everyone wanted to do their best, and everyone wanted to win. The reality is society is a mix of people that show up for very different reasons, have very different motivations. And so just being able to adapt and understand people better and to lead with different styles. Not everyone will respond the same way to the same thing. And so as a leader, you really have to adapt your style and to motivate people, to get the best out of them, to get them to perform.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. In fact, a question I often ask people who have been managers of others on the podcast is is it best to have a leadership style or to lead the way others want to be led? I think a lot of the times I get a mix of both. Sometimes people say it's both of them, and then some people say it's lead how others want to be led. I don't think anyone's ever said
Mm,
have a leadership style because it does seem rather static. And if you do have
yeah,
people who don't respond to it well, then what do you do with those people?
yeah. I think it has to be authentic. I would say that's probably the most important thing. It has to be in my own skin with my own style. and my own values and beliefs, and I'm not going to compromise that. But that doesn't mean that I can't go into others' worlds, understand them, and adapt, right? We have some truths that maybe we want to hang on to. A fun example for me, I'll go back to the jungles of Indonesia. That was one of the first big engagements I ever managed. We had about 30 people working in the jungle, coding away. Probably 20, 22 of them were from Indonesia. We had 5 or 6 from Singapore, one from, excuse me, 5 or 6 from the Philippines, one from Singapore, and one from Australia. And that was the team. And it was really my first time working internationally. So you had 3/4 of the team was Muslim. I'm a guy from the Midwest in Minnesota in the early 90s. I didn't even really know anything about being a Muslim. I certainly didn't know anything about Ramadan. So I came into work probably my second week in being in Indonesia, and I found everyone asleep at their tables where they should have been coding. I'm like, what's going on here? And I asked one of the leaders, Danny, I said, what's up? But, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon and everybody's napping. And he said, well, Sig, it's Ramadan. We fast from sunrise to sunset. And he filled me in on some of the details. And he said, it's really difficult and challenging and we get tired. And so we nap in the middle of the day. I thought, okay. Well, this client's paying us hourly. I was sent over from headquarters from Anderson to help lead in the Anderson way. But I sought first to understand, why was this happening? What are their values? I learned a lot about Ramadan. At the end of the day, I said, all right, so clearly I'm not Muslim. I'm learning from you. How about I join you in the fasting and the meals and just learn about your culture and this celebration? And I want to work through lunch. And if I work through lunch and don't need a nap, and maybe we all work through lunch and not take a nap. He said, sure, but you might be tired and need a nap. I think I was 26 at the time. I said, okay, I'll agree to that. And just being young and 26, I didn't need a nap. And as a result, the team pressed on and we had no more naps, in the final 26, 27 days of Ramadan. But to me, that's an example I look back on. And I could have gone a lot of different directions with that. But I chose to learn and combine my style of hard work and try and find a middle ground where we could do the work needed for the client that had hired us.
You think you could have worked through the lunch hour now if you had to do it all over again?
I don't think so. As you know, Neil, 45 weeks ago, I had a cardiac arrest and died. So there's no more, burning the midnight oil. I'm healthy and great now, right? But I take life a little bit more with purpose and deliberate. And, I don't need to pound that midnight oil anymore.
Got it. I mentioned in the intro that you founded Be the World's Best. What was the motivation to do that?
Yeah. Well, it was that cardiac arrest 45 weeks ago. When you die, I was flatlined for 8 minutes before I was resuscitated. And that gives you pause to think, why am I still here? What is my purpose? What is my mission? We talked about my life as a corporate leader, and I was sort of semi-retired, helping consult, build companies with entrepreneurs I enjoyed and liked. When I was in the hospital, the first 2 days, I spent 7 days in the ICU. The first 2.5 days, I had a thing called anterograde amnesia. And what that means is I couldn't form new memories at all. So, Neil, if I knew you from before my cardiac arrest, I'd remember our whole life together, everything we'd done. But if I met you in those first 2.5 days, I'll give you an example. The phlebotomist, I think, would draw my blood every hour. You would come into the room and I'd say, hi, what's your name? You'd say, Neil, I'm the phlebotomist. I'm here to draw your blood. And I would tell you 5 or 6 times before you could even draw my blood, you are the world's best. Then you draw my blood, and apparently, Neil, you were very, very good at drawing my blood. I would tell you 10 more times before you left, you are the world's best. But it was my own personal Groundhog Day. You'd come back an hour later. I didn't know your name. I didn't know you'd drawn my blood. So people are explaining to me what's wrong. And whether you were the janitor, the nurse, a friend, whoever it was, I would say to you, you are the world's best. I didn't know I was doing it. In the weeks after my recovery, as I'm reflecting on what's my mission, why am I still alive, people are telling me the stories and filling in the gaps. And I thought, why did I say this crazy thing? You are the world's best to everyone. And I kept saying it after my interrogate amnesia, unaware I was saying it. And I think there were a couple reasons I said it to people. I think number one, it was my fancy way of saying, thank you. I appreciate you. You're great. Good job. I just chose you're the world's best. I think the second reason was I knew I was pretty messed up, even though I didn't know what was wrong with me. And it was my way of motivating people. I needed the world's best doctor, the world's best nurse, the world's best friends. I needed myself to be the world's best version of myself if I was going to be okay. So I became my own hype man. If people hear they're great, they're fantastic, as opposed to you can't do it, there's no way, you start to believe it and transform in a positive way. So I was doing that unconsciously to people. Um, and it led to several other things along the path, but really the journey in the 6 weeks or so after my cardiac arrest, and that phrase helped me form the genesis of be the world's best, because I do believe all of us have the power, talent, and capacity to be the world's best version of ourselves. It's just waiting to be unleashed, and we need to overcome the barriers and be that every day.
Nice. So what do you provide with Be the World's Best?
Yeah, so I do the keynote speaking, which you talked about. I also do workshops, um, and individual coaching or coaching of teams. I'm just finishing a book, which has been pretty exciting. That's going to be people to buy it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, other sites, probably beginning of August. I just submitted it to the book editor this week, which is pretty exciting. So that book, it's titled Dying to Be the World's Best. Reignite your heart to reinvigorate your life. And, I tell some personal stories in there, some of which we've talked about here. I tell the story of the jungle in Indonesia. But really, the book was written to provide people with the tools, methodologies, and equip them with both the mindset and the skills to be the world's best version of themselves. And so there's tangible takeaways from the book and on my website that provide the methods, provide the tools, and can help people to be the world's best version of themselves. So whether I'm speaking or it's the book or a workshop or coaching, it's not just inspiration. It's to equip people to change their lives and become more productive, become more joyful, and have more days and moments where they're the world's best version of themselves. The other interesting thing is part of the book, I surveyed people. I talked with people. I sent people emails. And I said, what does it mean to you to be the world's best version of yourself? And I got over 100 responses to that because it's very personal. It means something different. And so one of the things I put out there recently was a summary of what's behind the words. It's easy to say, be the world's best, or you are the world's best. But what does that mean to a cross section of people, a cross section of the world? So that's what I provide. And I'm really here. That's my mission. That's my passion. I'm here to make a difference.
Nice. That's really cool, Sig. Sig, when I first started this podcast and YouTube channel, and still the case to this day, it's about the speaking journeys of people with technical backgrounds. And it all started with myself not being the best at giving presentations in front of management when I worked as an engineer. And I was really curious to hear from other technical people what they did to get better. So I'm curious, when it comes to speaking in front of others, is that something you've always been good at? And if not, what did you do to get better at it?
Mm. So I've always done it. I can remember in ninth grade, there was an elective called speaking, and I took that as an elective in high school. Uh, I didn't really start speaking. I mean, if you're leading teams, you're speaking a lot, in a conference room, at a meeting, but it's, delivering a deck, delivering a pitch on the budget. you know, all of that is speaking. So we all have opportunities where we're sharing ideas, pitching, getting buy-in, communicating the problem, the solution. All of that's forms of speaking. It may be one-on-one, it may be in a conference room. So all of those are opportunities to hone the craft, if you will. In my role, building businesses and launching new businesses, I often would find myself corporately in front of large audiences, talking to everyone in the business about, you know, we're just launching this new product. Let's take the hill. And motivating people in that sense. But that's very different from professional public speaking. Professional public speaking is totally different. And it's how do you connect with other people in a very, very different way. But speaking in the context of work, I would even then record myself. It's so easy to do these days with a cell phone. And seeing that feedback could be uncomfortable. I know early on I was like, wow, I don't like my voice. Well, I'm probably not going to change that. And I think that's natural for most people. The first few times you hear yourself talk and it's recorded, you're like, wow, what's up with that? Is that really how I sound? And yeah, it is. And it's okay because it's authentically you. And so I think just building up the comfort level, getting feedback from others, super important. I've always been open to feedback from others. As professional speakers, I will always ask for feedback at the end of my speech from the audience. Put up a little QR code, get anonymous feedback. If people want to say who they are, great. But it's being open to that feedback. Formal training is available. If people want to go that path and get a coach, that's what they do. They train you to speak and be more effective at it. But it's really about learning, right? As technical people, as geeks, I mean, I do think of myself as always having been a geek. Um, I think one of the defining characteristics is learning and just being open to learning. And if you're open to learning, gosh, the world's your oyster. You can improve and get better at anything, but it's that openness to learning and change. I think that's the foundation.
100%. Yeah, I fully agree with you, Sig. It really does start with being open because I think a lot of us technical people, when we come out of school, perhaps, I mean, you sounded like you had a course, but a lot of us didn't. I know I didn't. But so when
Yeah.
I came into working, it was definitely something that I wasn't prepared to do. I was forced to do it since it was part of my job, and I got better at it through trial and error, really. And what really got me to over that hump was the curiosity of what could I do to improve at this? Because I want to get better at it. And the
Yeah.
main reason I really wanted to get better at it was I'd get questions after the presentations I gave in front of management that I thought I'd answered during the presentation.
Mm.
So I found myself just talking more than I anticipated talking. So I thought, well, maybe if I explained it in a way that they could understand the first time, maybe I won't get the questions the second time. So I won't have to speak more and I can get out of here as quickly as possible. So it was definitely something that I thought could benefit me and then also benefit them as well.
Yeah. That was your light bulb moment. As
Yeah.
I look at the light bulb behind you. Yeah.
100%.
I also teach swimming to kids. I do that 2 days a week. For me, it's about giving back and enjoyment and passion. And we have a thing at the swimming school I teach at. It's called FOSS. It's called the light bulb moment. The light bulb moment, and it's really about both connecting, with the kids in the class or connecting with the parent in a way that they get and understand and inspires them. And that's the light bulb moment. So I was inspired by your light bulb behind you and the geek. I think that kind of crystallizes a lot of good thoughts.
Nice. All right. Yeah. Good minds, strong minds think alike. I like that. Okay. So, Sig, last question. Well, second to last question. For the people who are watching and listening to our conversation, and they are people who see themselves as wanting to get better at speaking in front of others, what is the first thing they should work on?
Mm, the first thing, that's tough. I tend to be somebody who I'll look at 10 things you have to do all at once. And, one of the things I need to work on is prioritizing, number one, and not just working on 10. I think there's a lot you need to work on, and it's about prioritizing something that can be accomplished and you can check the box. I think finding someone that can be your mentor is super important early on. When I started to write my book, I've never written a book. I didn't know anything about writing a book. I could have flailed and gone a lot of different directions, but I sat down and was blessed to talk to about 40 people who'd written a book. And I took them to breakfast, a coffee, whatever, phone call. And for me, that helped set the right trajectory for writing my book and make me more productive and effective. So I think if you want to improve your speaking, you can read a lot online, right? That's easy. That's a default. But I think to get a mentor, a person that knows you and you think speaks well, or maybe even a professional, but they're willing to give you that feedback and coach you and tell you how they went about it. So if you can find that mentor, I think it really sets you up and will save a lot of cycles and to use a geek term, debugging. You won't have to debug as much as you go.
Wonderful. This has been a great conversation, Sig. Thank you so much for being a guest. How can people get in touch with you?
Sure. I have a website, betheworldsbest.com. I'm on LinkedIn as Sig Muller. And my email, if you want to email me, is sig, S-I-G, at betheworldsbest.com. So love to connect with your audience and really appreciate being with you, Neil. I think you're doing a great service for everyone and has the opportunity to be blessed to listen to your podcast and the help you're providing them, Neil. You're the world's best.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Sig. And with that, that marks the end of another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I am the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks, Sig.
You bet. Thank you.